Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for our first edition of Brothers War spoilers. So this spoiler season was a little weird. Normally during spoilers, we talk about the new cards each day as they come out, but this spoiler season, it didn't work because I was away in Vegas and didn't have my stuff for making videos. But don't worry, we're going to be catching up over the next few days. For the next few days, each day, we're going to do a different color and talk about literally every single relevant card in that format. We'll talk about every mythic, we'll talk about every rare, and any relevant or playable commons and uncommons. So today we're going to kick things off with the white cards and talk about the white cards of the Brothers War. And at the end of the video, we will talk about the 3 best cards of that color for Standard, for Modern and Pioneer, and also for Commander. So that's the plan for today. Also, before we jump into it, I should say, one of the gimmicks of Brothers War is we have a lot of artifacts that have colored abilities. So technically they're colorless to cast, but to get full power out of them, you gotta have colored mana in your deck. So we're gonna add those artifacts in with their colors. So if there's a artifact that has like a white activated ability or something, that's going to be in with the white cards, and then the colorless cards will be in the full-on colorless video that we'll get to later this week. So anyway, before we jump into it, 2 reminders. Number 1, if you want to see all the Brothers War spoilers or any future spoilers, you should mosey on over to MTGpreviews.com. And number 2, if you need some Brothers War cards, you should check out our awesome sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. They'll hook you up with all the cards you need and even give you a free goldfish sticker. Just let them know you want one in your order notes. Anyway, let's talk the white cards of the Brothers War. So first up today, we got Autonomous Assembler, one of the new cards featuring the prototype mechanic. And I gotta say, this mechanic, even though it's kind of just another version of split cards, I really love it, and I think it's super powerful. So the gimmick here is Autonomous Assembler can be a 5 mana 4/5, or if you got some white mana, which is why it's in our white section, you can cast it as a Grizzly Bear, a 2 mana 2/2. Either way, it's gonna have the same ability, which is Vigilance, and you can pay 1 and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on target assembly worker you control. So the flexibility of prototype is what interests me in this card. Is a 5 mana 4/5 with these abilities, it wouldn't be very exciting, but does the ability to cast it as a Grizzly Bear give it some potential? And I think the answer is maybe. So we've seen similar mechanics before where you have these cheap creatures that can grow themselves. That's essentially what Assembler is, because there's really not many assembly workers in Standard, and even fewer good ones. I guess if you want to build a full-on assembly worker meme deck, maybe an against the odds assembly workers, you can with Mine Worker and Power Worker and Tower Worker and Mishra's Foundry, but really there's not any incidentally good assembly workers floating around. So from a competitive sense, I think this is really going to be growing itself, essentially. It is a little bit slow. You got to put mana into it. Starting off as a Grizzly Bear and then for 1 mana growing each turn potentially, that's not super duper exciting. I think the biggest problem for this card in Standard is even if you prototype it, there's just a lot of good 2-drops. Even in mono white, you got to beat out Guardian of Benalia, Thalia, Intrepid Adversary, Sun Gold Sentinel. That's a lot of really playable cards. And then if you get into multicolor decks, you got Denix and Phyrexian Missionaries and a bunch of other options. And all of these cards just start out better than Assembler. Like, it is nice that Assembler grows throughout the game, but that combined with its prototype flexibility, I'm not sure is enough to actually make it into a playable Standard card. So I love the mechanic, but I think that Assembler itself probably not quite gonna make it in Standard, thanks to the prevalence of many powerful white 2-drops and the fact that there just aren't really a lot of assembly workers to work with it. We also got Calamity's Wake, a new 2 mana instant that exiles all cards from all graveyards and says players can't cast non-creature spells this turn, and then it gets exiled. So this is essentially a pseudo silence. Silence hits on any spell. Calamity's Wake only stops your opponent from playing non-creature spells, and I guess stops you as well, but you also get a Tormod script built in, which is a nice little bonus. Does the fact that you get this graveyard hate on top of your pseudo silence, and really, I should say that hating on non-creature spells is fine. If you think about what silence usually does, you're mostly not trying to stop creature spells. You're trying to stop your opponent's counter spells, trying to protect your combo, trying to prevent your opponent's combo. So I think as far as what silence role is in competitive Magic, Calamity's Wake is going to do it just as well. The big problem is, if you think about how silence is played, it's normally like, okay, cast suppress my silence, make you counter that if you have a counter, hopefully tap you out, and then proceed to combo off. Adding 1 mana to silence, making it 2 mana, that is kind of a big deal. That means you need 1 more mana to pull off your combo. Is the upside of getting a Tormod script and hating on the graveyards enough to make it worth it? I think the answer is maybe. I do like that Calamity's Wake is relevant in many more matchups. Silence is pretty much only played in combo decks. Calamity's Wake, I could see jamming this in my Pioneer sideboard or even my Modern sideboard, thanks to the flexibility. Like, sometimes the silence mode's gonna be good, many times the graveyard hate mode is gonna be good. If you add those both together, maybe it's good enough to see some sideboard play. Same is kind of true in Standard. In Standard, there isn't much that you're gonna do with the silence mode. Most decks are running out a bunch of creatures, there's no combo you're stopping, but the graveyard hate is pretty relevant. So Calamity's Wake, this is on my wait and see list for formats like Modern and Pioneer. Maybe it could see some Standard sideboard play as well. We also got Combat Thresher, another prototype card, and this one I think is worth mentioning just because it's like kind of efficient if you prototype it. So 7 mana 3/3 double strike ETB draw card, not very good, but a 3 mana 1/1 double strike ETB draw card, that could be in the conversation. We've seen similar cheap ETB creatures see play in the past, so this doesn't seem like an all-star to me. There is a lot of competition with Adalines and Brutal Cathars in the 3-drop slot in white decks, but if your deck cares about artifacts, or maybe you're trying to get ETB blink value or Panharmonicon style value, I don't think this is a completely absurd option for your deck. We also got in the trenches a new white mythic. So 3 mana enchantment, creatures you control get +1/+1, and you can pay 6 to exile target non-land permanent you don't control until it leaves the battlefield. You only get to do it once and only as a sorcery. So in the trenches, this is a pretty powerful card. Like, it wasn't that long ago that Glorious Anthem was kind of playable, where you would just play this to pump your weenies and get in more damage. In the trenches is Glorious Anthem, like, plus. You get this Oblivion Ring, a very expensive Oblivion Ring, but still you get this removal mode built in on top of it, which is a very powerful effect. The problem is, we got Wedding Announcement in Standard, and Wedding Announcement is just straight up busted. It flips around into it in the trenches, plus it's making creatures, maybe drawing you cards, and I'm just not sure how many of these effects you could play. If Wedding Announcement wasn't in the format, then I would think this would certainly be in the conversation for White Weenie style decks, but since we have Wedding Announcement, which I think is just a better version of in the trenches, I think the upside of drawing cards and making some bodies is better than the 6 mana, Oblivion Ring style effect. I'm not sure this will actually see much play until after rotation. This will survive rotation longer than Wedding Announcement, so this might be one of those cards where we check back next fall after Wedding Announcement is gone, and this takes Wedding Announcement's role. In the meantime, if you're looking for Wedding Announcement number 5 or Wedding Announcement number 6, this is certainly powerful enough to show up in your White Weenie style deck or multicolor aggro style deck, so worth keeping in mind for sure, but probably not quite as good as Wedding Announcement. We also got Kayla's Command, and we have a whole cycle of commands in the set. The white one, Kayla's Command, 3 mana sorcery, which instant speed commands, a lot better than sorcery speed commands. You get to choose 2 of, make a 2/2 colorless construct artifact creature token, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, it gains double strike until end of turn, search your library for a basic plains card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and you gain 2 life in Scry 2. So if you add all of this together, you're essentially getting a artifact Grizzly Bears, mixed with a weird Kaya's Onslaught, mixed with sort of a Tithe without the extra upside of being behind on lands, and then that last mode, gain 2 life and Scry 2. We really don't have a comparison for that. I went with Faithful Mending because it gains 2 life and does a looting thing, which is kind of similar. People have argued that Scrying 2 is roughly the same as drawing a card, which might actually be true, and if you think of it that way, it's actually not too bad. If this was an instant, I would be really high on this card. As a sorcery, it's really tough to figure out. It's competing with like Ambitious Farmhand, Restoration of Vajano. Just think about the modes. Like, I assume that you're mostly going to choose to make a 2/2. So you get a 3 mana 2/2, and then you get a plane. So you're Restoration of Vajanoing or Ambitious Farmhanding, or maybe you do some life gaining and scrying, which we talked about is kind of like drawing a card if you scry 2, which would make it kind of like a Circuit Mender or an Inspiring Overseer. The double strike is nice. That is a mode that can just straight up kill people. Although again, sorcery speed double strike, a lot less scary than instant speed double strike, because if your opponent has blockers, they know they just gotta block the double strike creature. When instant speed double strike, you wait until you see what's unblocked and throw the double strike on it and probably just kill your opponent. So I think that Kayla's Command, I like the flexibility, but again, I'm not sure it actually beats out the other effects that are in the format. So a cool card, Kinda wish it was instant speed and I would be super high on it. As it is, it might be flexible enough to show up a bit, but again, there's a lot of competition in these white decks in Standard. Speaking of Kayla, we got Kayla's Reconstruction, a sorcery that is 3 white and X. It says, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You can put up to X target artifact or creature cards with mana value 3 or less from among them on the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So Kayla's Reconstruction, it's kind of like collected company at home if you think about it. So for, let's say 5 mana, you're essentially getting a collected company that goes 1 card deeper and can hit artifacts as well as creatures, which is a nice upside in certain decks, maybe a snake and equipment or something. On the other hand, it is sorcery speed, which is a huge downgrade compared to collected company. So that's kind of the drawback. It is a sorcery, so I don't think this is collected company level, but that's a good thing. Wizards has talked about collected company in Standard and kind of said that they probably should have banned it, so it's right on the cusp of just being straight up too powerful for Standard. So maybe this powered down version is going to be about right for Standard. The one thing I will say about this card is you do need to play a ton of creatures in your deck. If you think about collected company itself, you're usually looking at like 30 creatures, and you probably want something like that for Kayla's Reconstruction to work, because remember, yes, it is true that you don't have to cast this for 5 mana. You can cast it for 6 mana and have triple X, or 7 mana and have quadruple X. The problem is you got to be hitting creatures or artifacts for each of those for it to be worth it, and even with like 30 creatures in your deck, how many creatures are you going to see on average in your top 7 cards? Probably like 3 or so. So casting this for 8 mana or something ridiculous probably isn't going to do that much unless you get super lucky. On the other hand, this does still trade up if you run well. Like, if you cast this for 5 mana, which is kind of the sweet spot, that's the closest to collected company mode, and you hit 2 3-drops, you're technically plus 1 mana. You got 6 mana worth of creatures for 5 mana worth of spells, and then you got the flexibility that you can cast it for more. Cast it for 6 mana and maybe get 3 creatures, assuming your deck is built properly. So I think this card actually has a chance to be pretty good in Standard. Putting multiple bodies on the battlefield, even as a sorcery, is just a really powerful effect, and we already have homes that are ready for it. If you look at some of the white weenie style decks, the white aggro decks in Standard, they're already playing enough creatures of 3 mana value or less that I think you can just make this work without making any major changes. So I do think this card has a lot of potential in Standard, and then in the late game, if you draw this off the top and you're empty-handed, well, you might as well just dump all your mana into it. Sure, maybe not every one of the X's are going to hit, and you're going to run out of creatures and artifacts eventually, but if you can get 3 creatures with this for 6 mana, it's actually kind of absurd. Then you're getting like up to 9 mana value worth of creatures or artifacts for 6 mana, which is a huge swing of card advantage and ramping. Outside of Standard, I don't think this really has much of a chance. At first I was like, okay, you played in like Pioneer Spirits or Humans in some formats, maybe Nykthos ramp decks. There's like Mono White Devotion in Pioneer. The problem is, once you get back to those formats, you got actual collected company, and it's easy enough to splash, even if you're like a Bant Spirit deck, and like 99% of your cards are blue and white. The meta's good enough you can just play actual collected company. On the other hand, once you get back to like Commander, if you can make your curve cheap enough to support this mana value through less card, it's actually kind of sweet, because there's some ways you can kind of break this. Maybe you're playing like an equipment style deck. Being able to have a collected company style card that hits your swords and hits your shadow spheres and your lightning greaves and your swiftfoot boots is nice. And then if you're playing Commander, you can also up your artifact count a little bit by playing artifact lands. We got the new cycle for Modern Horizons 2, like Goldmire Bridge. We got the old cycle from original Mirrodin, like Ancient Den, and those are artifacts that you can put on the battlefield with this. So if you want to build around the effect a little bit, you can get some more value out of it. So Kayla's Reconstruction, I think this card's gonna be good for Standard. This is one of my favorite white cards for Standard from the set. Outside of Standard, maybe in certain Commander decks, but I don't think it's gonna make it in Modern or Pioneer. We also got Lay Down Arms, which is worth mentioning because it's pretty efficient. 1 mana sorcery, exile target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of planes you control. Its controller gains 3 life. So I think this has a chance to be a decent Standard removal spell. Exiling's really nice. Getting rid of like Tenacious Underdog forever or Disturb Creature forever is an upside, and assuming you're playing a deck that is primarily or exclusively playing planes as your lands, this does scale pretty well throughout the game. Like on turn 1, you play your land, you can get rid of a 1-drop. On turn 2, you get rid of a 2-drop. On turn 3, you get rid of a 3-drop. Gonna be worse in multicolored decks. I guess Triomes help a little bit, but I think this could at least have a role out of the sideboard in like white aggro decks, in standard white weenie style decks. We also got, this card, a card I've been waiting for a long time, Loran of the Third Path, probably better known as the White Rexage. So 3 mana 2/1 legendary human artificer. It is vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment, and then you and target opponent each draw a card. You can tap it to get that ability, which, ignore that ability. I don't know how often you're gonna use that, especially in 60 card formats. There will be times I think in Commander where that's gonna be nice, but in 60 card formats, it's essentially a legendary White Rexage, and this is exciting because even though white is one of the best colors at blowing up artifacts and enchantments, it's never had just a straight up Rexage style effect. This 3 mana ETB blow up the artifact or enchantment, and this is Rexage plus in a lot of ways. I guess being legendary is a drawback. You're gonna legend roll yourself on occasion, but I think that's fine, and I think that this ability is gonna give Loran of the Third Path a lot of potential in standard and outside of standard as well. So in standard, we've talked about this a little bit. The white decks, they have such good 3-drops. You got Adalines, a Brutal Cathars, Extraction Specialist. Is it gonna be worth playing Loran over those cards in your main deck? Maybe not, although we are entering into a standard where we have really powerful enchantments from previous sets. We have the Ascendancy Cycle, we got Wedding Announcement, we got Fable the Mirror Breakers, all the Kamigawa sagas, and then we're getting a bunch of really powerful artifacts from Brothers War itself. So I think most decks are going to have some targets for this, so maybe that's an argument for main decking it. Worst case though, I think you can sideboard this, probably over something like Cathar's Commando, so I think this card certainly has a role in standard. And then, if you think about Rexage, that shows up quite a bit in like the sideboard of elves in older formats, like Pioneer or Modern. In Loran, it's a human, which is a relevant tribe for older formats. It is a deck that shows up in Pioneer and in Modern. So I think that Loran has a chance to be a sideboard all-star as well, because humans/white decks just haven't had this effect before. And then in Commander, this is the new staple. Rexage is one of the most played green creatures in all of Commander. I think that if you are building a white deck in Commander, you run this roughly 100% of the time. Like, it's going to be very, very hard for this to be bad. I don't think you play it as your Commander. I guess you could, but to me, this is a 99 card, and I think you will never be disappointed to have a Loran in your 99 in your white-based Commander deck. And then in Commander, I think that last mode actually can be good on occasion. You can curry favor with the mana screwed player, or just give it to someone who's not a threat. Maybe someone already has 7 cards in hand, so what's one more card? Or maybe someone's pretty far out of the game, not really a threat to win the game. Give them the card, and you get the advantage of getting the extra card as well. So Loran, I love this card. It's super good. New Commander staple, and I think a card that could show up at least in sideboards all the way back to Modern and maybe even Legacy in 60 card formats. We also got Loran's Escape, which is a pretty powerful protection effect. 1 mana instant. Target artifact or creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Scry 1. This reminds me of the standard safe version of Blacksmith Skill. Blacksmith Skill kind of does the same thing for 1 mana, except you can pump the creature if it's an artifact creature. This is a card that came out in Modern Horizons 2, Blacksmith Skill, and it has developed into like an oddly powerful staple in Modern in like Hammer Time style decks, where this is just the ultimate protection. The combination of hexproof and indestructible means you're saving your thing from a wrath, you're saving it from target or removal. Outside of like an edict, it saves your stuff from anything. So I don't think that Loran's Escape beats out Blacksmith Skill in Modern. I think Blacksmith Skill is probably still just better, but for a standard version of this effect, this is really, really good protection. So we got a ton of great removal in standard. If you were concerned about protecting a certain artifact or creature, this is going to be a great way to make sure that thing stays on the battlefield, and to get a little Scry 1 as a bonus. So Loran's Escape, I think if you're looking for that protection effect, really, really good option to keep in mind. We also got Myrel Shield of Argive, one of the best mythics, at least from white in this set. So 4 mana 3/4 legendary human soldier. During your turn, your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities from artifacts, creatures, or enchantments, and then when it attacks, you create X 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens, where X is the number of soldiers you control. So Myrel, this card is essentially a 4 mana Grand Abolisher, a really strong effect, protecting you from counter spells, essentially just shutting down your opponent from interacting interacting with you during your turn. And then that last ability, there's not a perfect comparison because Myrel does need to attack to actually get it, but assuming you are playing a soldier deck and all your creatures are soldiers, when you attack, you're essentially getting a Nomad's Assembly. You're getting a soldier for each creature that you control, and that is incredibly powerful. Like, you could be making so many bodies if this sticks on the battlefield. Also reminds me a little bit of Hero of Bladehold might be another good comparison for Myrel, which was a really powerful card in its standard like a decade ago. The only downside is it does need to survive a turn. It only triggers when it attacks, so its protection ability is nice, but that doesn't stop your opponent from just killing it during their turn. But if you can attack with this in a deck that's designed to put some bodies on the battlefield, it is going to snowball out of control really, really quickly. So the question here, and really the question about white as a whole from Brothers War, is how good are soldiers going to be in standard? If soldiers are good, this card's going to be one of the reasons why, and we got a lot of pieces to make soldiers good now. Many of the things we were missing after Dominaria United, like a good one drop, we got it now. We got Recruitment Officer, and now we get a bunch of additional payoffs. We got Siege Veteran for more protection. We got multiple Lord style effects with Valiant Veteran, King Darien. We got cards that put multiple bodies on the battlefield like Resolute Reinforcements, Thalius to slow down spells. The pieces exist to make soldiers good. I think it's also possible that you can build just like a soldiery mono white deck with Myrel, maybe like a soldier tinted mono white token style deck with Myrel and Adeline and Wedding Announcement. Like, if you can play a soldier, we're just talking about like Recruitment Officer on turn 1, Thalia on turn 2, on turn 3 maybe the Adeline, turn 4 the Myrel, and you start making tokens with Adeline, and the next turn you start making tokens with Myrel, you can go super wide super quickly. So I don't even know if you have to be dedicated soldier tribal. Like, that's where Myrel's going to be most powerful. But if you can have a decent number of soldiers in your deck and be some sort of go wide white aggro deck or token deck, maybe play with Ginny Fae to upgrade your soldiers into cats and dogs, I think Myrel's probably fine there as well. I also think this is going to be a very powerful and popular commander card. Right now, Darien, King of Kaljor, is the #1 soldier tribal commander, and while Darien does have some neat tricks where you're like damaging yourself to make a bunch of tokens, if you just want to play like soldier aggro, I think Myrel is the way to go. And I also think if you're playing any sort of soldier deck, Brimaz soldiers, Beard soldiers, I think at Myrel, easy inclusion in the 99. The Grand Abolisher mode to shut down your opponent's interaction during your turn is great. And then, like I said, it just snowballs super hard if you can get a big board full of soldiers. So Myrel, one of the more powerful white cards, I think, that we've talked about so far from the Brothers War. Next up, we got another artifact that needs white mana to really be fully powered in Platoon Dispenser. So Platoon Dispenser, 5 mana, 4/6 construct. It says at the beginning of your end step, if you control 2 or more other creatures, so not counting Platoon Dispenser, you get to draw a card, and then you can pay 4 mana to make a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token, and then for some reason you can unearth it for 2 and a white. Unearth doesn't seem super exciting with this card, although I guess you get to draw another card, so it is a nice bonus. So is Platoon Dispenser going to be good enough for standard? You get kind of a personal Howling Mind, assuming you have some creatures, which if you're playing a Platoon Dispenser deck, you probably should be built to have creatures, plus it can make creatures on its own, so hopefully you're drawing an extra card each turn, and then you're getting like a mobilization, a little bit more expensive, 4 mana to make the token rather than 3, but still a nice mana sink, repeatable token production. My concern for this card is, I think if it's gonna work, it's probably gonna be in a soldier deck. That seems like the most obvious home. I guess it could be in any sort of go wide aggro deck though. The question is this too expensive? Is 5 mana too much for like white weenie, white aggro, for soldier tribal? Those are pretty aggressive decks. If you look at soldiers, they want to be curving out from 1 up to like 3 or maybe 4 for Myrel. Do you want this 5-drop in your deck, or is it just going to be a little bit too much? Even though a 5 mana 4/6, good body, drawing cards, good ability, making soldiers a fine mana sink, you add it all together, it's a really powerful card, but where does it fit? Is it too expensive for aggro? Can you play it in mid-range? Can you play it in control? That's going to be the question for this card. So I think this is a very powerful effect. I'm just not sure where the home is. The last mode of paying 4 to make a soldier, it might look expensive, but really if you compare it to past cards like Dawn of Hope or Mobilization, 4 mana is a pretty fair price, especially since, remember, its first mode triggers on your end step, so ideally this card's gonna cycle. You play it, you go to your end step, you have a couple other creatures, you immediately draw a card. Even if it dies, you've already gotten some value out of it, and then if it sticks around, you got a big body, a constant card advantage engine. So like I said before, Platoon Dispenser, I think this is a very strong card. I just don't know exactly where it fits in standard. So if this can find a home, I can see this card being really, really good. Also possible that it's one of those really powerful effects that just doesn't exactly have the right support pieces to make it work. So we're gonna have to wait and see, but I really like this one. Next up, we have a pretty interesting common, Recommission, 2-mana sorcery. Return target artifact or creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If a creature enters a battlefield this way, it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter. So Recommission, it's like a expensive unearth effect. You pay 1 more mana, but you're getting an unearth in white, and I think that that's actually fine. Like, this is kind of the going rate for returning a creature mana value 3 or less, plus you get the upside of getting an artifact, plus you get the upside of getting a +1/+1 counter, and this is a common. This is only a common, so popper potential maybe. In standard though, if you're getting a 3-drop with this, like an Adeline or a Brutal Cathar, you're kind of generating some mana. You're getting an extra mana, 3-drop creature for 2 mana, plus you're getting the extra +1/+1 counter. So with how grindy standard is and how much removal there is, I could see this being a decent option where you just play this as a way to get back your good thing that dies. So worth keeping in mind, even though it's just a common. We also got one of my favorite cards from the set, Recruitment Officer, 1 mana 2/1 human soldier. So a Savannah Alliance, and that has an ability where you can pay 4 mana, including a white. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, snag a creature with mana value 3 or less to put in your hand. The rest go on the bottom. So this is exactly what you want out of your 1-drops, especially your aggro 1-drops. On turn 1, this is perfectly on curve. A Savannah Alliance on turn 1 in an aggro deck with 2 relevant tribes is actually just a very good card. And then the problem with a card like that though is as the game goes along, it loses its value. If you draw it off the top on turn 5, you're pretty sad because a Savannah Alliance isn't likely to do much work then. But Recruitment Officer with that second ability, if you draw this off the top on turn 5, you're perfectly happy with it. You play it and then you activate it and you draw another card to keep churning through your deck. So I think this is one of the missing pieces for soldiers in standard. With Dominaria United, we talked about the potential of the soldier tribe. The problem was, or one of the problems, is it did not have a playable 1-drop. Now it not only has a playable 1-drop, it is a great 1-drop. So if we see Myrel and soldiers working, it's probably going to be because Recruitment Officer is filling up that 1-drop slot, giving you those aggro starts and the card advantage in the late game. Plus, remember, it's not just a soldier, it's a human soldier. And we have some human decks running around in standard. Humans have Hopeful Initiate as a 1-drop in standard, but I think this is at least a great secondary 1-drop if you're playing a human tribal deck. So double tribal potential in standard, and I think this could actually show up outside of standard as well. Not sure if it can make it to modern. It might be too slow for like modern humans, but like soldiers in Pioneer or humans in Pioneer, I think this might just be better than Thraben Inspector. As much as I love Thraben Inspector, I think the repeatable ability to pay 4 to draw a card is probably better than a 1-shot pay 2 to draw a card in those decks, in those tribal aggro style decks. Plus you get more power, which is also an upside. So I'm actually really high in Recruitment Officer. Even though it's an uncommon, I think this is one of the strongest cards from the entire set for standard, thanks to its dual tribal capabilities, and maybe even for formats like Pioneer as well. We also got Repaired Recharge, which I was on the fence. Do we even talk about this card? This is one that I'm not even sure it'll be relevant, but I wanted to mention it. So 5 mana sorcery, return target artifact, enchantment, or planeswalker card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and you make a power stone as a bonus. So the reason I wanted to mention this card is we actually saw Refurbish a few years ago kind of be a standard staple, thanks to its ability to reanimate God Pharaoh's Gift. Repair and Recharge, it is 1 more mana, which is a bit of a bummer. I guess you do get the Power Stone, but if you're trying to reanimate some big artifact, this does get the job done. On the other hand, we also have Invoke Justice in standard, which is also 5 mana, and it reanimates something, not even restricted to artifact enchantments and planeswalkers, just any permanent, and you get to put a bunch of counters on your stuff, which is kind of busted. However, Invoke Justice, it is 4 white mana, so I think there could be a world where there's some deck that wants to do the refurbish thing and reanimate some big artifact, because we got a ton of those in Brothers War, but is like 3 colors, doesn't have the ability to consistently play quad white mana. That's where Repair and Recharge could be in the conversation. Plus, I don't know, maybe in Pioneer, maybe we can do mono white God Pharaoh's Gift or something, now that we have multiple reanimation spells to get back God Pharaoh's Gift. So Repair and Recharge, maybe it's just more of a limited card, but keep in mind that being able to reanimate a big artifact is a powerful effect. Next up, we have one of the best soldiers, perhaps, from this set in Siege Veteran. If soldiers work, this card is definitely going to be a reason why. So with 3 mana 2/2 human soldier, says the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. If that sounds familiar, that is literally Luminarch Aspirant's ability, except it's on a 3-drop rather than a 2-drop. But we just saw Luminarch Aspirant be one of the best cards in its standard format, to the point where it was like getting rebalanced in Alchemy, like arguably too good, or maybe too good, or on the cusp of being too good. So that ability by itself is pretty exciting. However, there's more to Siege Veteran. Siege Veteran, whenever another non-token soldier you control dies, create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. So this is a expensive Luminarch Aspirant that is also like a Headless Rider or a Xanthra Necromancer, and we have seen these cards in the past be really, really good protection in tribal decks. If your opponent rasts your board and you're playing zombies, Headless Rider just refills your board, or Xanthra Necromancer for humans. I think that Siege Veteran kind of does the same thing. Of course, you're only getting 1/1s rather than 2/2s, but that's still fine. Your opponent rasts everything away or casts a bunch of target removal. You're getting these replacement effects to rebuild your board. So I think a Siege Veteran, just one of the best soldiers that we have from this set, and one of the best in standard, either number 1 or number 2 behind Myrel. But I think that if Soldier Tribal is a thing, this is going to be one of the reason why. So just automatically slot this into the 3-drop slot in your soldier deck. It is going to be very, very good. We also got a weird removal spell in Soul Partition. So 2 mana instant, says exile target non-land permanent. For as long as that card remains exiled, its owner may play it. A spell cast by an opponent this way costs 2 more to cast. So Soul Partition, the best description I've heard of this card is it's kind of like a white disperse. It's not really permanent removal, it's temporary removal. It's almost like returning the permanent to your owner's hand, except it's get this white taxi upside. We're getting the Anointed Peacekeeper or Elite Spellbinder effect, where that spell's going to cost 2 more to cast. Is this actually good enough to see play? So what's the upside? It hits any non-land permanent, so that's nice. We've seen like Anointed Peacekeeper, Elite Spellbinder be very good. The taxing effect is pretty obnoxious, and it's instant speed. Those are all 3 marks in this card's favor. On the other hand, we have Fateful Absence in standard, which, as long as you're hitting a creature or planeswalker, just straight up gets rid of it. The downside is your opponent gets a clue, and I guess if you're trying to get rid of an enchantment or an artifact, Soul Partition is going to help you there way Fateful Absence doesn't. If you really want to go combo in older formats, it kind of works well with Drannith Magistrate, since your opponent won't be able to recast the spell from exile. We're getting to the point where you can just build a full-on Drannith Magistrate deck, toss in the Elite Spellbinder, toss in Anointed Peacekeeper, toss in this Soul Partition, and build some weird taxi deck. Although, if you don't draw the Drannith Magistrate, your deck's going to be a little clunky. So I think that Soul Partition, I'm really on the fence on this one. I think it could have a role in standard, and I think it goes up in value if your deck specifically cares about spells. If you are playing a deck that has Honeygen, or maybe a Leer deck, I think that this might be of higher value, because if you think of the white removal that we have in current standard, the best removal spells, the most played white removal spells, are actually not spells at all. They're creatures and planeswalkers like Brutal Cathar and Wandering Emperor. So if you're trying to grow your Honeygen, or you're trying to have stuff that you can flashback eventually with Leer, that Soul Partition is in the conversation at a minimum. So we'll have to wait and see. The fact that Fateful Absence is in the format and doesn't even see that much play makes me a little skeptical that this is going to be worth it, but it's efficient, it's a nice tempo play, and in older formats, you got some synergies with like Drannith Magistrate. We also got a new Artifact Angel in Steel Seraph, and this is another prototype card, and this one I think is very good. So 6 mana, 5/4 flying. So at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gains your choice of Flying, Vigilance, or Lifelink until end of turn, and then you can prototype it for 3 mana as a 3/3. So essentially, a 3 mana 3/3 with those abilities, or a 6 mana 5/4 with those abilities. And this is where you can really see the power of prototype. On turn 3, a 3 mana 3/3 that can immediately start throwing around these keywords, that's a very powerful effect, especially with flying. And then later in the game, a 6 mana 5/4 with those abilities is perfectly fine as well. So I'm pretty hyped for this card, because I really love Angels in standard. I still think they're one of the sleeper tribes that just hasn't gotten the respect. And if you're trying to play Giadas and Archangel Rats and Seraph Paragons, this fits perfectly in the deck. Although it is awkward that you can't recast it with Seraph Paragon, because technically its mana value is 6, but still, perfectly at home in Angels, and even more important for Angels, because the 3-drop slot is maybe the weakest on their curve. If we were playing Inspiring Overseer, which is pretty much a filler level Angel, it's okay, but it's not actually that exciting. Steel Seraph actually gives the Angel deck a legit 3-drop, and also the Angel deck, thanks to Yada, easily gets up to 6 mana, so it's not that impossible that you're going to actually cast this for full price. And remember, its ability to give a creature Flying Vigilance or Lifelink, that's going to trigger the turn it comes into play. It's not just targeting itself, it can target any of your creature. So you can run this out, and even though it's summoning sick, you can just give your, whatever, Sarah Paragon lifelink until end of turn, or maybe your Archangel of Wrath Vigilance, so you get in and gain some life and still have a blocker back. So that's a very, very powerful effect. Also, I think you can just play this as a good 3-drop. Even discounting Angels, one of my pet decks, I think you can just play this as a white Rini threat. Like a 3-mana 3/3 flyer with those abilities, that's just a powerful effect. Imagine sending an Adeline to the air to just smash in for lethal damage. That's what Steel Seraph lets you do. And then the prototype ability gives you some flexibility where it's late, you draw it off the top, you got 6 mana, you cast it and get a little bit bigger creature. The one thing I will say is I don't think this really has a chance outside of Standard, because most of the decks that would want it, like Righteous Valkyrie style Angel decks, they're Collected Company decks, and the one downside of Prototype is its actual mana value, much like with Sarah Paragon in Standard, is 6, so even though you can cast it for 3 mana, you're not going to be able to Coco into this or anything like that. So Steel Seraph, maybe one of the best white cards for Standard, I think, in this entire set. And if you're playing Angels, it goes up in value even more. We also got Tocasia's Welcome, a 3-mana enchantment that says whenever one or more creatures with mana value 3 or less enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Trigger this ability only once each turn. So how good is this enchantment? It compares to Welcoming Vampire. The twist is Welcoming Vampire triggers on creatures power 2 or less. Tocasia's Welcome hits on creatures mana value 3 or less. So Tocasia's Welcome is going to draw you cards with a wider range of creatures. The downside is it's a non-creature enchantment rather than a 2/3 flyer. We've seen Welcoming Vampire see quite a bit of play in certain decks in Standard, and in some decks this is a pretty big upside. Like this is going to draw with Anointed Peacekeeper or Adeline or Intrepid Adversary or Sun Gold Sentinel, and these are creatures that Welcoming Vampire wouldn't actually trigger on. So this should trigger on almost every creature that you'd play in some sort of white weenie deck, which I think maybe gives us a role, probably not in the main deck, but in the sideboard. Maybe it's better than Reckoner Bankbuster. You see a lot of these like white aggro decks playing Reckoner Bankbuster in the sideboard to have some grindy card advantage for matches that are going to go long and to fight through removal. Maybe Tocasia's Welcome is just better than that. You don't got to spend any mana on it. It should be drawing you every single turn, assuming you have a creature, and if you're drawing an extra card, you should always be hitting a creature. So it does snowball really well. The downside is, as we learned playing Riveteer's Ascendancy not that long ago, oh my god, are Standard decks good at killing enchantments. Enchantments that gotta sit on the battlefield in this Standard, they are a tough sell because almost every single deck is gonna have a way to deal with it. There's just so much enchantment removal, and because people are playing Fable the Mirror Breakers and Wedding Announcement, some of the best cards in the format, most decks are loaded up on enchantment haste. So how practical is it for Tocasia's Welcome to actually sit out on the battlefield for a bunch of turns? That's my one concern. So I think it's a powerful effect. I'm definitely interested in trying to play it in the sideboard, out of aggro decks, in Standard, but I am a little worried that it's just gonna die too often. Although I guess if your opponent's spending a card to kill this, that's a card they're not using to kill your other stuff. I will also say there could be some Commander decks where this is good. My first thought was Afara got of the pull list. Afara's ability is kind of similar, where it rewards you for having a creature come into play each turn, not just your turns, but your opponent's turns. The same is true with Tocasia's Welcome. If you can be flashing in creatures on your opponent's turn, you can be doubling up this draw, tripling up this draw, quadrupling up this draw in a game of Commander. So I think if your mana value is low enough, which might be a challenge in Commander decks, but if you're playing a weenie style deck with a ton of cheap creatures, then I think this can be a really nice source of card advantage, especially if you have the ability to flash creatures into play. Like imagine just this plus White Mane Lion every single turn, 2 mana, draw a card, do it during your opponent's turn. If you get a cost reduction effect going, it gets even better. So there are ways to synergize around this, especially in older formats. So Tocasia's Welcome, sideboard card for Standard. We'll see if it dies too often. Sweet potential as kind of a weird combo piece, and decks playing a lot of cheap creatures in Commander. We also got Urza Sylex, another artifact that needs white mana to really do anything. So it's 3 mana. It's a legendary artifact. You can pay 4 mana, including double white, to exile it, and each player chooses 6 lands they control, and you destroy all their other permanents, can only do it as a sorcery. And then when it's put into exile from the battlefield, like when you activate it, you can pay 2, and if you do, you search your library for a Planeswalker card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle. So Urza Sylex, it compares to some cards we've seen in the past. Nev's Disc, Perilous Fall, Oblivion Stone, these artifacts that can essentially exile or wrath away the entire board. Urza Sylex, in a lot of ways, is better than the rest of them. Perilous Fall, 9 total mana to activate. Oblivion Stone, 7 total mana, so the same as Urza Sylex. Neveneral's Disc, gonna come into play tapped, so you can never activate it right away. Urza Sylex, for 7 total mana, should blow up all the non-land permanents, and maybe even some lands in some cases, which is very, very strong. The downside is it does require white mana. One of the places you see like Oblivion Stone or Perilous Fall or Nev's Disc are in colorless decks, in like Tron style decks. Are those decks going to have white mana to activate Urza Sylex? That's going to be the question. I think as far as standard is concerned, I would be looking at this as a card for Super Friends decks in specific. I think as a Wrath, it's not that efficient, especially in a world where Farewell exists. It's hard for me to understand why I would play Urza Sylex over just a straight up Farewell, although it is nice that this is a little faster, 3 and then 4, so you can technically do this earlier in the game than a Farewell. But if you're a deck that can also tutor out a Planeswalker, then Urza Sylex seems really powerful. You sweep away all the non-land permanents, and then grab your Wandering Upper, or Elspeth, or Karn's Living Legacy, I guess, to play the following turn. That's a really, really big swing, and we have some pieces to make Super Friends work in Standard. We've played Urza Assembles the Titans a couple of times, and it's always super, super powerful, way stronger than it looks. We got Broker's Ascendancy for more loyalty counters, so maybe we can see a Super Friends deck develop, with Urza Sylex being a hybrid like Wrath/Tutor to slow things down and get things set up so your Planeswalkers can take over the game. The other place I want to mention this card is, well, I kind of mentioned it before, like a Tron deck in a format like Modern. I think there is some upside here. One of the upsides is Karn the Great Creator is a messed up card, and it can snag artifacts from exile as well as your sideboard. So all of these artifacts that exile themselves, like Urza Sylex, are actually pretty powerful with Karn. Like, in theory, you can Karn the Great Creator, snag Urza Sylex from your sideboard, play it, activate it, it goes to exile, then Karn the Great Creator to get it back out of exile to Wrath again if you need to do it again. Plus, you're able to tutor up like Karn Liberated or Ugin the Spirit Dragon or a Karn the Great Creator, which is really, really good. Remember, the rate is the same as using Oblivion Stone, like 3 and 4. That is exactly what Oblivion Stone's gonna be. So you have the same rate as Oblivion Stone, plus you get this extra upside, plus you can tutor up your Planeswalkers. The only question is double white a deal breaker? That is the big difference here for a format like Modern. Is your Tron deck gonna be able to have double white and enough colorless mana to do it? Maybe. It might take a rebuilding of Tron, like going into green-white Tron or having a bunch of chromatic spheres going on, but it's worth keeping in mind. There is a lot of upside here. The other place where this is going to be very good, and I think where it's just going to be an all-star, is going to be in Planeswalker decks, Super Friend decks, and Commander. So if you're playing like a Troxa Super Friends, Joda Super Friends, Aminatu Super Friends, this is a great Wrath. It wraths away everything that you need to deal with. Plus, if you're up against a green ramp player, you're probably going to hate on your opponent's lands, put everyone back even on lands at 6 in the late game, and then you get to tutor up whatever Planeswalker you want most in the situation. So love it for Super Friends and Commander. In Standard, I actually like it if you're playing a Super Friends style deck. Modern, wait and see on Tron. Maybe it's possible. The double white scares me, but it is a strong effect. So anyway, that is Urza Sylex, and that's actually our last card for today. But before we go, we gotta talk about the best cards for each format. All right, so we have the 3 best cards, in my opinion, for Standard, for Modern/Pioneer, and also for Commander. So starting with Standard, here's my picks for the 3 best cards. Number 3, Myrel, Shield of Argive. I think this card is absolutely busted. It's so, so strong. The question is, will soldiers be good? If the tribe is good, Myrel's going to be a reason why. It's going to see a lot of play, but you never know with these tribal cards. If the tribe flops, the card's going to flop alongside it. So a little bit of a risky pick, but I am very high in Myrel. Number 2, Kayla's Reconstruction, which just seems great in Standard. I know it's a bad collected company, but collected company's too good. Being able to dig 7 cards deep and put 2 or 3 permanents on the battlefield at the same time, a good way to fight through removal, generate card advantage, do some ramping, really good card. And we already have decks that are built for it in Standard. And then number 1, Steel Seraph, which is just a good card on rate. Yes, I know, I want to play it in Angels, but you don't gotta play it in Angels. That is not necessary. 3 mana 3/3 flying, good abilities, that's fine. 6 mana 5/4 flying, good abilities, that's fine. It's just a really flexible card that's got potential to show up in multiple places. Moving on to Modern and Pioneer, this one is actually really tough. I did not see a lot from the white cards in the Brothers War that really jumped out to me as being like true staples in a format like Modern or even Pioneer. But here's what we've got. Number 3, Recruitment Officer, which I do think, especially in Pioneer, is going to be good in Soldiers and Humans. We played Soldiers on Budget Magic a little while ago. Definitely will be playing this in the Soldier deck. Easy inclusion in the 1-drop slot. And I also think the same is true of like Urza of Humans, Ban Humans, whatever color combination of humans you're playing. I think this will show up in some number. Number 2, Calamity's Wake. Is 2 mana too much for a silence, even with Graveyard Hate thrown in? Or does the flexibility of being a silence that can also hate on other archetypes like Graveyard decks, is that going to be enough? I'm going to go with maybe, but considering there's not a lot of competition for the Modern and Pioneer cards from this set so far, I think this definitely deserves to be on our list. And then number 1, Loran of the Third Path, the White Rex Age. I just think this card's really good. Yes, it's not going to be a 4 of main deck card. It might not even be a main deck card at all, but I think the fact that it's a human and it's a White Rex Age and it works with Coco makes this a easy option for a lot of decks to play in their sideboard to hate on artifacts and enchantments. Moving on to Commander, number 3, Urza Sylex. We just talked about this one. I think it's great in Super Friends decks. I think it'll be a staple in Super Friends decks, and you could play it outside of Super Friends decks as well, even though it's not super efficient. But I like that it can hate on the green ramp also. I think that's a nice little upside that may be overlooked with this card, putting everyone down to 6 lands. So I think that Super Friends for sure, and maybe in the conversation for other decks as well. Number 2, Myrel, Shield of Argive. I think this is just the new best soldier commander. I know soldiers aren't a super popular tribe, but if you want to build commander soldiers, I think this is the way to go. And then number 1, Loran of the Third Path. This is the most stapley commander card of white from the Brothers War. If you're playing a deck that has white mana, throw it in your deck. It is going to be great. Again, not hyped about it being the commander and leading my deck, but in the 99, I think this is a true staple that pretty much every white deck should play and is going to want to play. Plus, in commander, you might be able to get some value out of that card draw mode as well. So anyway, those are the white cards from the Brothers War. That's been our video for today. What do you think? You've seen my picks for the white cards of the Brothers War. What are you hyped for? What are you going to be playing? What are you building? What did I miss? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll be back tomorrow to talk some more Brothers War spoilers. So until then, have a spectacular day, and I will talk to you soon.